Hello, Arts and Culture of Asia students. Welcome to our module on the philosophies of ancient China. I should say philosophies and beliefs of ancient China. And we left off last week looking at the end of the Zhou dynasty, the spring and autumn period, where you were briefly introduced to the context of a legendary figure named Lao Tzu. We don't know if he actually existed, who is the author of the Tao Te Ching, and Confucius, who is a very important figure around the same time as the legendary Lao Tzu. The context of this period in which you were briefly introduced to these towering figures in Chinese belief, thinking, and overall mindset is one of instability and convulsive warfare that ensues shortly after the spring and autumn period in the time of Confucius and Lao Tzu into what's known as the Warring States period. And this is the period in which the material that we are mostly looking at today is either in or touching upon or has risen out of. And what we're looking at is when you or I experience a great deal of upheaval in our lives, a lot of things get shaken. And while that can be very upsetting, very disruptive to our psychology, to our families, to our sense of security in the world, it also pushes us into new places. It pushes us to ask new questions, and it pushes us to seek other kinds of resources to make sense of the world. And it was no different for 4th century BC China as it is for us as individuals today, just different scale, different contexts. So today we're going to examine the kind of the development of what is essential to understand the Chinese way of approaching reality, approaching politics, approaching art making. It's a bedrock that needs to be laid out. And to do that, we're going to look at a text that preceded and informed both the writing of Taoism, both the work of Lao Tzu, the legendary Lao Tzu in Taoism, and also the work of Confucius, and that is called the Book of Changes. So let us get started without further ado. So here we are, Out of Instability, the Book of Changes, Philosophy and Belief in, oops, I'm not sharing yet. Sorry. Here we are, Out of Instability, Philosophy and Belief in Ancient China. Let me just show you that slide a little bit longer. There we go. Okay. So we're looking at the Warring States period, which follows the dissolution of the Zhou dynasty from not roughly, 475 to 221 BCE, a time of intense conflict and political fragmentation in ancient China. 7 major states, the Qin, the Chu, the Qi, the Yan, the Han, and the Wei, and the Zhao competed for power, each seeking to dominate the others. This led to significant developments in warfare, unsurprisingly. Philosophy, of course, many were asking why this is happening. Governance, asking how can we better rule? And into this comes the beliefs and the philosophy of Confucianism, Taoism, and legalism. Your reading talks about legalism, but our focus in today is Confucianism and Taoism, and even more significantly, the text and the mindset and way of thinking and understanding the world that kind of sits under both of them. And that is the Book of Changes, making sense of the world when it crumbles. So the Book of Changes, that's the English translation. And then here we have Yi Jing or I Ching. And these I'll explain why we have two names a little bit further on, but it has to do with debates about how best to express Chinese pronunciation using Roman letters. Anyway, every day we make decisions to minimize conflicts and disruptions, to make peace with ourselves and people around us, don't we? Every day we take actions to smooth our inconsistencies and irregularities to make our lives look more manageable and meaningful. Every day we perform our duties to our families and our professional organizations to present an image of loyalty and responsibility. Yet despite our best efforts, we know that we must have missed a great deal of opportunities, overlooked a lot of options because we knowingly or unknowingly tend to be distracted by immediate interests. Unexpected circumstances and unanticipated events arise. The fact of the matter is that in the end, we do not fully know the results of our decisions, no matter how deliberate and hard we try. Are they truly effective in solving problems or repairing an strained relationship? Or are they merely hiding problems? Or delaying solutions? Or are they inadvertently causing further damages or sowing the seeds for bigger problems to come? Yet despite worry, anxiety, and self-pity, we continue to move forward. Occasionally, if we think hard enough, we may even find blessings in disguise. A missed opportunity leads us to a new development. A wrong turn directs us onto a fruitful path. A hurdle pushes us to think more carefully about an alternative solution. In the end, we must admit that the world is far more complicated than we can imagine. We must take a pragmatic and provisional attitude. We do our best to make informed decisions, but we do not know how far we can go and how much we can accomplish. The Book of Changes is a quest to be at peace with a complicated world, and it's central to its philosophy. Despite its multiple authors and divergent layers, the Book of Changes focuses on one question. Given that we have no full knowledge of ourselves and our surroundings due to constant changes in the world, how do we conduct our life meaningfully and responsibly? So even if we could avoid distractions and stay on point at all times, which we can't control our environments, and they may surprise us. And when a variable changes, an outcome changes. So our actions only go so far. These are questions that were quite relevant during the late Zhou and Warring States period. So the question the Book of Changes asks is, since we do not have full knowledge of ourselves and our surroundings due to constant changes in the world, how do we conduct our life meaningfully and responsibly? Directly addressing these three aspects of the human condition, the Changes aims to alleviate our self-inflicted anxiety and agony. So it's really about relief and working with the suffering that comes with being a human in a world full of unknown variables and being in constant being yourself. It reminds us of our limited ability to know our surroundings. It provides us with a set of divination rituals to calm our minds. Through these measures, the Changes help us develop an appreciation of ourselves, not only knowing who we are, but also finding out what we can and cannot do. In short, the Changes helps us develop self-confidence so that we can face changes with dignity, humility, and resolve. Okay, so about those names. So the Book of Changes, it is sometimes in older literature presented as I Ching. Yijing is actually the proper pronunciation, Yijing. And there's a little bit of a debate between an old romanization. I won't bore you with the name, but it dates back to before the development of the official romanization system called Pinyin, adopted by the Chinese government in the 50s. So Yijing is what you'll see typically in writing after the 50s. It's what the Chinese government has declared is the proper way to pronounce certain pronunciations in the Chinese language. Yi Ching with the CH, you'll find in older texts. Hopefully in my slides, I've been consistent. I tried my best to just refer to the text as Book of Changes or Changes. But if you see a Yi Jing or a Yi Ching, either way, in either form of the spelling, it's the same book. So the contents of the Book of Changes is multi-layered. Traditional accounts claim that the first layer of the core text were graphic symbols, the 8 trigrams by a mythical figure named Fuji. So I probably have two kinds of students right now. I have students who have heard or know of these trigrams. Maybe you're interested in divination, tarot, Chinese medicine, alchemy. And then I have students for whom this is absolutely new. So in both cases, it's important to work slowly and methodically through this material because if you know something about it, it may not be quite right relative to the time we're speaking of. And if you know nothing, you might become a little bit overwhelmed by such foreign looking images. So we're looking down here at a divination form that we're going to visit again. And you might have noticed it's a little bit similar to this page from the Yi Jing, here, the Book of Changes. And we'll develop that shortly. So here's Fuji is a very important figure. He's a mythological figure, a legendary figure in ancient China, worthy of a discussion in of himself. But for now, we're going to take this account of his discovery and foundation of this divination system at his word, so to speak, as the Chinese literature has done. All right, so let's back up for a minute. So what we're looking at here, you see this lightly colored diagrams. These are 3 lines that kind of look like barcodes in a way. And we'll go deep into these lines, but these are known as trigrams. And right here, and there is 8 of them. And you can notice for now that there is made up of two, they're binary. They're either a single line or the same line broken in 2. So that's a trigram. And this is, we'll talk more about it. Then a little later, after Fuji, we have the founder of the Zhou dynasty, allegedly, King Wen, and the Duke of Zhou as well, but we're focusing on King Wen. He developed these trigrams a little bit further and stacked them into what's called hexagrams. And this is the basis for a divination system that we're going to look at deeply, but thinking about it in hopefully a way that protects us from reducing it to superstition and understanding it to be a system of knowing and exploring and asking questions about the world that assumes that human beings simply are incapable of ever knowing definitively an answer. And so how do you work in your humility and your smallness as a human being with big questions? And one way is to use indeterminate means. And so divination, with its somewhat open-ended structure that is grounded in an understanding of the nature of reality, which we'll talk about very shortly, creates a space to both explore history, past failures, future questions, in a way that's very different than Western philosophy, which is deductive and logic-driven, and assumes it's possible to reach a crystalline right answer. This method assumes humans are incapable. They can only understand the nature of reality and its fluctuations of constant change and seeking balance and rebalance. More about that in a minute. And then ask questions within that reality, within that metaphysical reality, that earthly reality of change, and then explore reflectively answers. Oh, sorry, I skipped something. Sorry. So what King Wen did is he not only made this system, but he then assigned certain meanings to these little hexagrams. One is called the creative, the receptive, difficulty beginning, youthful folly, waiting. Much of these are linked to the stories of the Zhou dynasty and its struggles and its history, particularly its domination and vanquishing of the Shang dynasty. So it goes back to this pivotal moment in the history of the Zhou dynasty and explores kind of the fluctuating process and kind of varying kind of circumstances or memories or encounters and moments in that history, and they are reflected in these diagrams. You can ignore these letters after it, and so it's not important for our discussion. And there are 64 of these, and I copied only some of them. There's no need to show all 64. All 64 are here, the hexagrams. So still with me? Okay, so the Book of Changes is made up of, first of all, just to quickly review, the primary figures here by a mythic, ancient, legendary figure looking pretty immersed in nature, hint, hint. And then a person from civilization, the Zhou dynasty, who's linking and is enlarging this kind of set of lines to 6 rather than 3 and relating them to experiences and history, but in deeply flexible, indeterminate ways. So there's a third piece to the Book of Changes, and it's a composite text consisting of symbols, divination reports, historical records, folklores, and philosophical treatises that are essentially commentaries on these forms. So rather, in a way, like the Old and New Testament, the Bible is composed of many different books and brought together. And even the same story is told, well, the same testimony is told 4 times in, say, the Gospels, for those of you who are familiar with the Old and New Testament. The Book of Changes is a compilation that is spanning a very broad period of history. And the 10 wings, which is what the last part is called, with their deep philosophical reflections on these diagrams, these hexagrams become a source of understanding the system itself, as well as a source of reflection, and become a kind of foundational worldview, an understanding of the nature of reality, and a deep place to search for tools to find answers to whether they're deeply personal issues, challenges, or statewide or global, or in our time, the environment, for example, or whatever's on your mind right now as we move through our news feeds and so forth every day in the morning. All right. So what is a trigram and what is a hexagram? Let's go in deeply and get away for a minute from these abstract forms. But I want to remind you, just notice it's very binary. It's just made of solid lines and broken lines, and they're in some combination. But they're based on something else. Let's go now to what is underlying the philosophy of the changes, and then we'll go back to these diagrams to see how they relate. Underlying the philosophy of the changes is the notion that the cosmos is in an organismic process without beginning or end. As a process, the cosmos resembles a great flow in which all of the parts of the entire cosmos belong to one organic whole, and all of the parts interact as participants in one spontaneously self-generating process. As such, there are 3 characteristics of this great flow: continuity, wholeness, and dynamism. Okay, so the universe is in a continual state of making and unmaking itself. There's no finite endpoint. It is a process. There are 3 characteristics of this great flow: continuity, wholeness, and dynamism. Continuity means there's something we can trace through all of it that gives it a stability that we can identify. certain regular recurring elements, features, wholeness. That is, there isn't any part of it that's sort of an outlier that's disconnected. It's integrated. Every bit of this flowing, fluxing reality of the cosmos belongs and is a dynamic part. And then dynamism, it's always moving, changing, it's dynamic. There are three characteristics of this great flow. Okay, as we know, continuity, wholeness, and dynamism. It's continuous because it never stops renewing itself. It's holistic because it includes everything in the universe and permeates in all aspects of life. So wholeness and holistic refer to the same concept. It's dynamic because it is full of motion and movement, generating energy and strength all the time, as that which is in movement always does do, even when that movement is painful. So now let's back up to history. The Book of Changes, it's originated in ancient China, probably as early as the Western Zhou dynasty. So right before the spring and autumn period, not that that's terribly important. That's when it's thought the Book of Changes originated. But the Book of Changes foundations likely go back to even earlier divination practices using oracle bones during the Shang dynasty, which you looked at last week. And I hope you used the British Museum link and you actually were able to look at them in 3 dimensions and see the burn marks underneath and get nearer to the traces of this ancient divination ritual than one could ever have imagined possible. Okay, so here's just the diagram of the Shang in China. Here's its boundary here. And remember the oracle bones, for those of you who have forgotten or haven't maybe reviewed the module, these are, this is a turtle plastron, the back of a turtle shell. And on it are questions written, inscribed in forms that still are constant with Chinese today. And it's ancient. And then heated rods are put on the underside of it, and then cracks form. You can sort of see some of the cracks. And depending on the cracked pattern, whether they break in 2 or 3 or move in certain directions, determines the answer to the question. And a diviner, a person who was skilled in reading these cracks, would have presented the answer to a question posed, such as a king, should I invade my neighbor? And the cracks are saying, wait, be cautious. So this is a very indeterminate way of getting an answer for a king. He's not using deductive reasoning, or a queen or empress. She's not using deductive reasoning. She's relying on a diviner. We must always remember that divining is another form of knowing the world, and the diviner has senses and sensibilities that drive the way in which something is indeterminate as cracks are read. So kind of bracket that in your mind. The Book of Changes, okay, is deeply connected to Fuji. I've already said that, and he's credited with laying the groundwork of the Book of Changes. I mentioned that in the introduction already, but I just want to keep you clear. So here's another painting. These are just different, much later paintings, imagining this figure, Fuji, in his very earthbound animal garb, an ancient, legendary, creationary, in a sense, foundational figure in China. He's said to, so Fuji is said to have sat about in nature. Here he is in very natural garb, a very primeval figure, and is said to have observed forms in the sky and looked down at patterns of the earth. So here's another nice illustration in a text. I have the reference here, it's a painting. And you can see that the artist has made a great effort to show kind of already that nature is in flux around Fuji. The cave out of which he seems to have emerged, or is in some relation to, is one of almost like spinning, it's centrifugal. There is a winding kind of green path that goes back, and it has a kind of undulating, flexing quality. The water, when he looks out to sea, is full of flexing waves. The waves here in the clouds, we're not sure which is which, are moving in and almost becoming part of the rocks that are in the exterior of the cave. So you can see that this is an expression of nature being, whether it's aquatic, whether it's water or earthbound stone, it's in a kind of fluxed relationship and it's in motion. So Fuji looked around and he saw patterns about in the world, as I'm sure many of you have done consciously or unconsciously. He saw how things originate, flourish, and decline. See, he saw all things as interrelated to each other, as well as to himself. He saw existence as ordered and unified. So he saw cycles of origination, flourishing, and decline, but he also saw how connected all elements are, and that he himself and all other parts of this world that we are together in are never separate from it, and that there's an underlying order that's always moving. But the unity he observed while intimately connected was varied and constantly changing. Every person, everything from its beginning to its end is continuously transforming. It is a whole that may be understood both its changing and its changing and its unchanging aspects through a symbolic representational system known as the trigrams and hexagrams. So another artist decided to paint a very spontaneous ink image of our wild primordial Fuji. I kind of layered the painting from the other manuscript underneath to kind of connect the two. But here we have Fuji in a kind of state of almost ecstasy or divine madness in what we would think of in the, almost like for those of you who've studied Greek poetry, being moved by a muse is a kind of madness. He's realized something. He's looking down at marks on a page, and he has realized something. And what does he realize? He realizes that there are two kinds of forces that constitute this ebbing and flowing, fluid, amorphous, and yet unified world that he's observed around him. And so one he indicates as a solid line, and the other he indicates as a broken line. And this is our yin and our yang. These are lines that indicate yin and yang energy, and that is what the whole diagram system is founded on, an expression of the harmony that happens between these opposing forces. And we'll later see, as time goes on, these two forces are given kind of, they're understood as a kind of vital energy called qi, but Fuji doesn't give us a name. He only seen that the material we have suggests only that he understands there's two oppositional, not even oppositional, but opposite kind of energies that cannot exist without one another. And we'll get to that in just a moment. But just make note of these broken and solid line. And then notice here under this, once again, I'm very fond of layering images. We can see that there's some sort of shape here that your instructor has put in with 3 lines and broken lines. And that's that trigram that we introduced this topic with. Here's the trigram, and now you can see it's at the feet of our dear Fuji. So he's drawn this trigram, in this case, it looks like in the sand here. And it's now, he's kind of come up with an idea of making sense of what he's seen all around him. This is some expression of the fundamental principles of the nature of reality, a set of forces of yin and yang. And is it accidental that there is a small turtle poking its little head up? And we know that these divination coming from the oracle bone, turtle plastrons, and other bones. We know that the turtle comes to have, significant significance in other ways. It's carries, this shell on its back is often seen as carrying kind of heaven and earth. It's also considered strong and can withdraw into itself. It has quite a lot of rich metaphorical possibilities. And the pattern on its back, some have argued, reflects kind of this circular diagram. I don't think we'll ever have an answer to that. It seems there's some affinities, but that's all we need to acknowledge, nothing determinate. What we can acknowledge is the diagram that actually our dear humans make that give now some names to these different trigrams. So here we see there are 3 solid lines, unbroken, and that's heaven. And we have earth as all broken lines, yin and yang. So we'll talk about yin and yang in more detail in a minute, but for now, yin is, some of you might have heard of it, it's tending towards the moist, the dark, the earthy. It's linked to classically feminine properties. The internal of a female is moist, dark, as is the interior of her womb, and a man is hard and dry. That's the kind of mornings can be moist in the mornings, but high sunshine can be very dry. So it's basically a kind of yin and yang, or that's a very quick kind of summary for you. But and we'll go into it a little bit more, but not comprehensively. But you can see then that there are elements here: earth and heaven, mountain and lake, water, wind, thunder, and fire. These are profound kind of elements of this reality of these 2 energy forces kind of moving beside each other. And so this becomes one way of understanding the whole of the nature of the world. The Book of Changes reveals that when the ancient Chinese thinkers observed the world around themselves, they saw that the natural world and the human world are intimately connected and constantly changing. They saw that every person and everything from its beginning to its end is continuously transforming. The natural way of the universe is that everything constantly changes. Things originate, that's a typo, develop and decline. From their cessation, that means when they disappear or when their life ends, new things grow. So let's go a little bit deeper into yin and yang. The word yang originally referred to the bright side of a hill, the side the sun shines on. So you have a hill here. The word yin originally referred to the shaded side. Neither light nor shadow can exist without the other. They are 2 interdependent forces. The shadow and light continuously flow into each other as the day progresses, showing that yin and yang are not fixed or rigid, but dynamic and constantly shifting. Since it was common that what is bright in the morning is shaded in the evening, and what is shaded in the morning is bright in the evening, it is clear that the idea of the alternation of yin and yang was grounded in experience. It grew out of observation of changes and reflection on these changes. So this kind of is here, when we think only of a divination system, we assume maybe that there isn't a philosophical element, but there is. This system was based entirely on observation, as philosophy is, whether you're coming from a Western, more deterministic perspective, logic-driven, or what we're developing here in this class, a different kind of foundation. Here's a quote from the Book of Changes. When, after winter, the yang breath pushes, black ants scatter everywhere. When, summer having passed, the yin breath is amassed, praying mantises devour the mosquitoes. One sees how the circle of the seasons profoundly touches the tiniest of beings. Just as the weather, each season carries in its womb creatures that are revealed in their changing aspects. Human feelings are always enriched by the new scenes that inspire them. It is this constant alternation of yin and yang that causes things to change. So now let's think about constancy. Reflecting on these patterns in these changes, these early thinkers saw several kinds of constancy or non-changed elements as well as different kinds of change. So let's examine those. The first kind of constancy is found in the rule that things are always changing. The rule is itself a constant that never changes. The second constancy is found in the patterns of change that themselves are unchanging. That yin and yang always alternate is unchanging. Day always follows night. Spring always follows winter. So there are cyclical patterns that don't change. The third kind of constancy is found in the endurance of things through their changes. Though from birth to death, a person is constantly changing, it is the same person through all those changes. Fourth, the orientation of heaven above to earth below and of every in between also remains constant through all changes. Our sky doesn't fall into our ocean, and our ocean doesn't become our sky. Our gravity doesn't turn upside down, and we don't float above the earth, and so forth. Fifth, the virtues of heaven and earth, by means of which they create, nourish, and benefit and sustain all things, are unchanging. So the heavens provide the sense of this beneficent nature of the heavens, rain, sunshine, the life-giving forces of the heavens. They don't change. They may be barren at times, but they return. They are an unchanging, but their presence is unchanging. Their character is constantly changing and in flux. Sixth, and finally our last, the human virtues by which humans assist heaven and earth in their creative and nourishing functions are also constant. So it's here an interesting point where we enter into this idea that human beings have duties to the heavens to behave properly and virtuously. And this is where Confucius is really able to develop his principles for a well-functioning, virtuous society. That to be good, to be virtuous, to be healthy for one another and for the planet, one can argue for today, is to be good to the heavens. And the idea is that this is a constant. We must assist heaven and earth in their creative, nourishing functions, that human beings are stewards of the planet and of the heavens. So now we're back to our diagram. So yin and yang, here it is. These are the trigrams. So we have heaven and earth. Now we can see the heavens that we just looked at are luminous, full of light, and they're yang. And the earth is, the minute you go underground, dark, it's soft, it's moist, it's pliant, and so forth. So it was assigned these properties of yin. But there are other elements here like wind and that have a combination of both, or water that's soft on the top and the bottom, but in the middle can be quite fierce and hard, or fire, which is the opposite of water. Notice that it can be hard and yang, but inside it has yin, and thunder and mountain. And we'll talk about now a few of these. Let's talk about wind. Here is the trigram for wind. So we have yin, one yin line, and two yang lines. So the two solid lines below one broken carries many symbolic meanings in literal and metaphorical senses. And you should know that these trigrams have been pored over, commented on, and continue to be commented upon now. So that's their beauty, actually. They are flexible to us as well, and their meaning. But the wind is known for its flexibility and its ability to penetrate. So penetration is something hard, right? It can get inside something. But to be flexible and to be pliant and to be able to be pushed back, that's very yin. It's known for its ability to move freely and penetrate spaces, reaching places that might seem inaccessible. In this sense, the trigram symbolizes flexibility, adaptability, and the power of subtle influence. It suggests that gentle, persistent effort can gradually influence situations, just as the wind can slowly shape a landscape over time. But the wind also has importance of persistence and thoroughness, indicating that actions might be carefully considered but sustained like a steady breeze. So now you've probably heard in what I'm saying, kind of like they sound like guidance now for behavior, and that's exactly what it is. These properties are then of wind are taken as for the person who's been assigned through a game of chance, which we'll talk about shortly, this trigram, in relation to a question, they're going to be thinking, should I be like the wind? Should I be steady? Should I be persistent? There's an element of gentleness. And so on. We could talk a long time about this, and there's some beautiful readings of the wind. So, but I think you get the idea. It's, and thinking about just being a human in the very natural world, feeling the wind and observing it. Think of the subtlety to look at the wind and what it's doing. It's moving dust. It's moving quickly. It's carrying things. It's being blocked. It's being mobilized and channeled and so forth. It can make some things fly. The trigram of thunder, here we have a solid line and then two yin lines, is powerful, sudden, and often startling. The Shen trigram represents sudden action, shocks, or moments of awakening. It's linked to the idea of a force that shakes things up, provokes immediate change or transformation. It can symbolize the initial burst of energy that breaks through stagnation, new beginnings and awakenings. Action and initiative. Again, there's many commentaries on these three lines of thunder, right? But you get the idea that this, again, it's the nature of thunder and its behavior is linked to these yin and yang balances. Water, one of the richest and most evocative of the group, I would say, is composed of two broken lines and a solid line in the middle. It holds rich symbolic and philosophical meanings related to the nature of water and its qualities. Its flow and adaptability. Water is highly adaptable, taking the shape of whatever container it is in. Similarly, the trigram of water symbolizes flexibility and adaptability to flow with changing circumstances. It represents the idea of going with the flow while maintaining an inner strength. Water can also be deep, mysterious, and potentially dangerous, as it can symbolize rivers, seas, or other abysses. It can signify hidden dangers or difficulties beneath a smooth, placid, beautiful surface. But it also suggests resilience in the face of these challenges. The solid line in the middle represents an inner strength amidst external uncertainty. Water takes the shape, it can flow. It's the idea it can move in many different directions, and can, so here we have the power of flowing with, water will flow with whatever it's given, or it'll be still if there's no place to flow and fill something up, or it'll sink into the earth if there's no place, if the earth will allow it to. Or it will remain and evaporate into the atmosphere if there's nothing to absorb it and nothing to let it flow forward. So the richness of water is its tremendous flexibility, its fluidity, its ability to flow. So I think at this point, you've sort of begun to get an idea, like, so these trigrams, which become hexagrams now, they are predictors, they're indeterminate guides to questions, or to how to approach a question. So what's the indeterminate part? How are they actually made? Let's quickly. They're made in two ways. Either they can be generated tossing a complicated system of tossing yarrow sticks, which are these sticks here, or by tossing a coin 6 times to generate either broken or unbroken lines for each throw. So I'm not going to go into the exact details of this, but here's a nice, this is Japanese, but it shows the throwing of yarrow sticks here. And there's plenty of trigram work, and here is another figure looking up the results. So here's an example of how one would create a hexagram. You would formulate a question such as the right time to quit your job and return to school. And then or if you're King Wen, 3,000 years ago, should I attack Shang King and try to overthrow him? So if your numbers are odd and even determines whether your line is broken or whole, or not broken. And there's more rules than that, but it's not worth our time to explain them because you can look them up. Hexagrams are constructed by the sequence of your throws. And ultimately, you will have a set of results of your throws that you will then correlate. So if your first part of your throw was Heaven, Chen, here, and your second part was another element, you would find yourself corresponding to these 64 different, and I don't have all 64 here, trigrams. So the system here is one where each of these hexagrams is made up of a trigram. And so here is from a contemporary Book of Changes translation, hexagram 3, if you did a series of throws, thunderclouds indicate profound disquiet, undertake no distant goal, but organized support. These are reading like fortune cards or tarot cards and so forth, and they've changed. This is a publication, and it's very easy then to quickly lapse into thinking, well, this is just superstition. And not take it seriously. And that is a major challenge of the changes, is overcoming the dichotomy between philosophy and divination. To many of us, divination and philosophy are diametrically opposed, whereas divination is based on a belief in a god or a deity who communicates messages to believers, we think, through coveted symbols or trusted mediums. Philosophy is based on rational thinking, cool-headed analysis, and precise articulation. To the authors of Changes, however, divination is intrinsically philosophical because its goal is to provide an opportunity for self-reflection while performing the ritualistic acts of divination, which are indeterminate. The inquirers find a quiet moment to review their past, examine their present, and make plans for the next step. For the inquirers, it's unimportant whether there is a deity or a spirit during the process of reflection, apprehension, and anticipation. It is more important that they reach a decision after carefully evaluating the available options and make a critical move to improve their lives. Again, under this is the assumption that even if you're the most cool-headed, rational philosopher with the most beautiful, logical mind, whatever decision you make could be changed by a new variable. And so the outcome may be exactly what you expected, but the circumstances of the outcome are an entirely new environment. And so there is, in the Book of Changes, a kind of hubris, pride, and human pride in thinking we have total control. And in a worldview where all is changing, and the human is a small part of a reality in great flux, that it has its own internal systems of harmony and balance. The human has no wrench or shovel to make any dent in this huge system of balances. It's just one part, and it's a part too. It's growing, decaying, dying, and then being reborn in new forms and being subject to the same forces as everything else in the world, cosmos is. And so when you think of it this way, in the sheer poverty of our human ability to be sure about anything we decide upon or conclude in this perspective based on a constant change, divination, especially as it develops in the Book of Changes with such rich commentary, becomes another frame for asking questions and getting answers. Okay, so this video is ending here, and we'll pick up in the next video on looking at Confucius and the relationship of Confucius to the Book of Changes. All right, so stay with me. I look forward to seeing you in our next video.